presenting that in English, and then also with this dramatic reveal, right? It was almost like the presentation that Apple does every year to reveal their new products, with pulling back the curtain from all of that intelligence. And you imagine that this is going to give Donald Trump even more fuel for his argument that the U.S. should pull out of the deal. He hadn't had that much fuel, new fuel, right? It was, oh, America gave too much money to Iran as part of this deal, that it was a bad deal. But here, if some of this stuff is true, that there are violations, then maybe he has more ammunition.
Because he said, Josh, he did say that the Israelis collected 1/2 ton of material from these secret vaults in Iran, 55,000 pages, 55,000 files. He said 183 CDs, and he immediately said the Israelis have already shared this information with the U.S., is willing to do it with other countries as well as the IAEA.
Right. He said the U.S. could vouch for it, right? And Mike Pompeo was CIA director until a week ago. But the question is the U.S. intelligence community going to release their own assessment of this material? Have they gone through it? What about the IAEA? How come he's putting on a presentation for PowerPoint 2 weeks before the thing instead of actually submitting all of this information and getting it vetted in advance, right? And so not a lot of people are going to just take Netanyahu's word for it. They're going to want to see what our government has to say. Second, U.S. negotiators are working on this right now, every day, trying to come up with fixes. Some of the fixes address these problems: the sunsets, the missiles, the secret programs. This is what we're negotiating with the people who are actually part of the deal, the Europeans. And here's someone who's not part of the deal, sort of kicking out the legs from under that negotiation, okay?
But Samantha, correct me if I'm wrong, the IAEA and the other international organizations involved in monitoring compliance with the 2015 agreement say that Iran has been fully in compliance with this arrangement.
They have said that, and that's why it's interesting, to Josh's point, why Netanyahu released this information when he did, publicly, rather than going directly to the IAEA. And by the way, why didn't he share it with Macron and Merkel before they came to Washington and lobbied for the United States to stay in the deal? In many ways, Netanyahu, if this information is true, set up Macron and Merkel to look a little bit foolish, because they were just in D.C. saying there's no way to withdraw from the deal because it's working, and now we have a direct counterpoint to that by Prime Minister Netanyahu.
We're going to hear from them, I would think, because I think they're going to want to look at this, and of course we're going to hear from Iran, right? Because they're going to say, this is all bogus, this is old, we didn't lie to the IAEA in 2015, et cetera, et cetera. But again, to your point, Josh, the timing of this is so interesting. Because it's so close.
Well, what that tells me is that the administration, in cooperation with the Israelis, are prepping the public case for pulling out of the deal.
Exactly.
Okay, so that kind of tells you that a decision has been made.
Exactly.
Okay? And that's really the only way to read this, because if they were still up in the air, they wouldn't have rolled all of this stuff out.
Because Josh makes an important point. I don't think the Israelis would have released all this information if they wouldn't have received a green light from Pompeo and President Trump personally. They told him, hey, this is all we have. Is it okay with you guys if we release it?
Yeah, and I'm sure the White House may have said, please release it, and Netanyahu releasing it in a way that's very easy for the average American to understand. You imagine this is something that's going to be all over the news, as it is now. It'll be on the nightly news as well, and it really, I think, makes it really easy for the average American to understand, and maybe even side with Trump, who so far has kind of raged against this deal, but hasn't been at the point of wanting to withdraw, and now he's got this new evidence that will need to be verified and sorted through as an argument.
He did this in English first.
That's the thing.
He did this for American consumption. It's very clear to me that he got the go-ahead from the President of the United States, because he wouldn't have done it otherwise, and from Pompeo to do this. And they may well be locked in, but I think it's also their way of showing Macron, Merkel, et cetera, that, you know what, here's what we know. Now you tell us why we ought to stay. And the Europeans may feel like they got the rug pulled out from under them. And I wonder what the impact of that's going to be.
Well, there's a chance here that the Trump administration could use this new information as leverage on the Europeans to get a better fixed deal, if that's what they want to do. They can say, okay, no more nitpicking. Let's get the strongest fixed deal possible. They've got 2 weeks to do that. That still might happen. Let's see. Maybe the Europeans come back and say, okay, now we understand what